If you're having a difficult time mastering Bob Ross's Happy Little Trees, give me just a few minutes and I'll show you how to get it done. Challenge number one to getting Bob Ross's Happy Little Trees done correctly is to mix the correct paint. The biggest problem we see in class is people want to use too much Sap Green into anything that is green in Bob Ross's paintings. Sap Green is a transparent paint, and so it's going to appear like a neon green or a very dull yellow, because this is to the yellow side of green. And so you're just going to have transparent trees that you can see anything that's in the background right through them. The best thing to do is to mix a little bit of Sap Green into some type of opaque paint, whether you make a green out of Prussian blue and cadmium yellow like I have here. I have cadmium yellow here, or you just go straight to Mountain Mix, which is what Bob often did. He would mix his Mountain Mix color and then add Sap Green into it to make trees, and that's what we're going to do here. I've got Mountain Mix straight out of the tube. That paint did not exist when Bob was alive, so you won't hear him refer specifically to a Mountain Mix. That is a product that was developed after he died, and I'll tell you, it is a big time saver because it uses the same paints that Bob normally mixed for Mountain Mix on the episode. Okay, so I would recommend that you go directly to Mountain Mix there. You know it's a pretty consistent product. It's going to come out the same. You don't have to worry about a lot of variations. And you know, being consistent on your paints is really key to understanding how to work with them. You know, if you have consistency in your paints, you know what they're going to look like on the canvas. So let's take a little bit of this. Well, let's take a lot of. We're just going to use all of this Mountain Mix today that I have out because we're just doing trees in this particular episode. And then I'm going to take a little bit. Notice I didn't take that whole pile of Sap Green. I took a little bit of Sap Green and I'm going to mix that into the pile. So the best way to mix is to add. It's real hard to get that green out of there. So add as you think you need it. Okay. So you're not going to be able to get that green out. So let's just mix this. Just notice that I turned that paint over. That helps us mix what was on the bottom. I'm going to scrape that up one more time and I'm going to turn that over. I'm going to mix that in pretty thoroughly. Now I have a color that really essentially looks black. That Mountain Mix is going to be a very, very, very dark color, and that's because evergreens are generally dark. Now, if we were in a values video, so if you stick around, make sure you subscribe to our video, and we will have a values lesson that we're developing right now. And you're not always going to go straight dark, but Bob often would do that in his episodes, so that's what we're doing today. If we talk about the advanced classes on values later, you know, values do all the work, color gets all the credit is the big saying. But in 27 minutes, Bob didn't have a lot of time to address values in detail. Bob understood them, but he didn't have enough time to explain them to a viewer. And frankly, most viewers really don't care. They just love the entertainment of watching Bob paint a painting. But here what we're doing is digging a little bit deeper into Bob's methods to show you all the things that Bob didn't have enough time to tell you about in the episodes. It's very important that you understand these things. So I've got a little bit of Mountain Mix, and I have my number 6 fan brush. You can use whatever brush you like. And I will tell you also too that there are many, many, many ways to do evergreen trees. You don't have to do them just with a fan brush. This is Bob's most common method, so that's what I'm going to show you today. But stick around for other videos, and I will have more advanced evergreen trees done with, let's say, a filbert brush, a couple of different ways with a fan brush that are non-Bob Ross methods. So stay tuned for our non-Bob Ross themed videos, and we'll show you other ways to do the trees. But for those of you who are Bob Ross fans just like I am, you'll want to know how to do these happy little trees with this handy dandy little fan brush. So let's get to it. I've got my Mountain Mix with my Sap Green here that you just watched me mix a minute ago. I'm going to load my brush on both sides. Okay, so if your brush is not sharp, Bob always had a great trick that actually really does work well, and he would pull through his paint, he would wiggle, he'd flip it over, wiggle, then pull, then flip it over, pull. So wiggle, wiggle, pull, pull, folks. That's all there is to it. That's an easy way to get your brush nice and sharp again. Okay, so I'll show you down here in this video also. See, it gets that brush nice and sharp. Okay, so what I have here is I have a practice board. I always recommend that when you're learning a new technique that you just keep an old canvas, or in this case, an old hardboard, that I keep around just to try out new things or to demonstrate things for my students in class. Having a practice board and practicing what you're trying to do first before applying it to your finished painting is very, very important, because you don't want to be having a beautiful painting that you've been working on for weeks or even just a day and then have it ruined by poor execution of a new technique. So always learn new techniques on a secondary canvas. You can just wipe it right off when you're done, like you see that I've done here. I've painted on this dozens of times, and I just wipe it right off. And so now I have a nice, just a green background. Depending on what colors you're using, you might get a neutral brown or a neutral gray that'll appear on your canvas. That's fine. That patina that you get on here is really just fantastic for applying new paints on top of it if you're practicing something new. It won't bother you at all. Okay, so how do we do this technique? Well, first we loaded our brush. And the most important thing that we've got to do here is we've got to remember that we need to point this corner of the brush toward the canvas. That's actually the second biggest challenge, is that folks don't understand how to hold the brush. So we're going to hold the brush pretty much horizontally. I'm going to rotate that brush. I'm lefty, I'm a lefty. So if you're right-handed, just rotate it. It's the same thing. Just rotate it to the right. And you just point the corner of the brush toward your canvas is how we're going to do this, okay? So a lot of times you would see Bob would just come up and he would hold his brush vertical just for a moment, and then he would just kind of tap a couple of times to get a trunk line established, and then he would go right to making his trees. I don't recommend you do that, especially new painters. I would recommend that you go ahead and give yourself a guideline. So I'm going to tap in a trunk right here, and notice that it's not exactly straight. It's just a guideline for me. My brush is very, very old, so it's getting a little bit wonky. But that's okay, because we're going to cover all that up anyway. But notice that I did not slide paint down. That's another thing I see folks do. I warn them all the time, don't slide your paint down that trunk, because it causes a little bit of problems. They do it anyway, okay? So try not to do that. I'm just going to load again just to make sure that I have enough paint in my brush before I do this. And now that I've got my trunk in, reloaded, I'm taking this corner and pointing that toward the canvas. Now, there are many ways that you can hold your hands here. Sometimes I've recommended to students, if I notice that they're having problems, see, Bob came at it, and he came at it from just kind of above, and he pushed it so that he's painting with the bottom of the brush, and it makes this like little puppy dog ear looking thing. See how I do that? So if I push the canvas, push it down on the canvas, when I push that canvas, that'll appear that way, because you're going to be painting with the bottom corner of your brush, okay? So he would come at it like this, all right? But I recommend sometimes, especially if you're new, you can actually rotate that brush back a little bit, and that'll help you when you push. So I'm just going to push, and I'm going to come out to the left or to the right, and then I'm going to go back to the center and come back out to the left. And see, I'm kind of just walking down steps, and I'm not trying to make a line. I'm going to show you some of the things that people do that don't look right in just a moment. So stick with me for that, because I'll show you some things, because sometimes people think they're smarter than the brush. You're not smarter than that brush, okay? And it'll defeat you every time if you try to do Bob's method in the way that I'm going to illustrate to you. So please don't do this, what I'm going to show you in a minute, but do this, what I'm going to show you right now. I'm walking, and I'm going back to that center, and I'm walking out to the right. And notice I'm not in the same line, and that brush is bending. And so as I'm coming down this trunk, I'm going back and forth, and I am coming back into that center, and then I'm walking that down. And as I'm going, I'm also starting to rotate my brush this way as I get down, because I want the branches to be bigger. So as I come down, and you'll notice that Bob did this too in the episodes, that the brush will start to rotate as he wants his base deeper. But right now, mostly what I'm doing is pushing a little bit harder to use more of that brush. Okay, and I'm just tapping. I am not sliding in any way, but I am rotating that brush now to kind of get us a little better tree. Now, look how simple that was. That was a very, very, very simple little tree. Let's do this one more time at normal speed. So, all right, let's get it in here. Okay, now you see how to do that. Here's what not to do. Okay. A lot of times people in class, they'll think that they can do something different than what I'm showing, or maybe they don't understand exactly what I showed them in class. And so they'll try to draw in the tree branches the way that they believe that they see them. But one of the problems in painting and in drawing in general is that you should always paint or draw what you actually see, not what you think you see. So what the customers or the painters that are painting with me, my painting friends, I usually call them, because I really enjoy the folks who hang out with me, they'll get their trunk in just fine. But then what they'll do is they'll think that they can start drawing in the branches. And I'm not exaggerating this. This is what it looks like. So they'll try to do this. So if you've painted with me and you've done trees like this, now you know what not to do again. All right, so they end up looking like this, when really they could just smash the, here, I'll even try to correct this. They could just use this method. It's going to be a pretty wide tree, so I'll have to go a little taller to make it a little narrower. That's fine. All right, so you can correct these trees if you've done them this way. All right, so see how I'm just kind of correcting them at this point. I'm using more paint and I'm not trying to draw it. I'm actually really not even trying to think about it except, hey, let the brush do the work, because the brush is a little bit smarter than me, right? I'm just a painter, right? Okay, so that's how you get your trees in, folks. Now, how do we apply them to a painting? Well, let's go back to the mountain painting that we've been working on in previous videos, and I'll show you how to apply what we just learned here up onto a real painting so that you can see how that these trees sit in the scene. Now that we've had our practice, we're going to apply what we've learned on that practice board onto this painting that we've been working on. And if you haven't seen the previous videos for this, we're 4 or 5 videos in. We did skies and water, we did clouds, we did mountains, and then we did background trees and then water lines. So now we're going to move into the foreground onto this painting, and you will put in those trees that we just started working on our practice. Now that we've practiced them a little bit, we'll put them in here and then connect them with a piece of land, and we'll be pretty much done. Okay, I've got my brush loaded just as we did in the practice video. So let's just come up here. Now this is one thing to consider too, is that this is merely the base layer of the trees. Of course, we have a trunk that we can put in, and I'll show you how to do that in this step. And then we'll also put in some highlights on here, because I know a lot of you struggle with highlights, especially if you're painting wet on wet. I will suggest to you that you can let this painting dry in between these layers on these trees. Your trees will actually look much better if you allow them to dry, because that way you're not worried about mixing mud. If you like to do the Bob Ross wet on wet technique, that's fine, and in fact, that's what we're gonna do today. But if you're painting at home, you can take your time and let these layers dry, so don't forget that. Okay, so I've got that trunk in, and I'm gonna reload that brush one more time, just to make sure, and away we go. Just apply what we learned, and don't overthink it too much or you will struggle, okay? When your brush starts to run out of paint, flip it over. That's one thing that we didn't talk about in the previous video. And I need to reload. Don't be shy about reloading. All right, so that's how you get your Bob Ross happy little trees in. Let's go ahead and put another one over on the other side. And then let's connect them with a piece of land. I'll show you how to get in some very simple land also. Hey, one other challenge about these happy little trees is that when you're putting in your mountains, let's go back a few videos, and when you're putting in your mountains and you know that you're gonna have foreground trees in there, one of the things that you should avoid is especially if you're gonna paint it wet on wet, is to glop titanium white paint on your mountains where you know your trees are gonna go. If your mountains are hidden by your trees, it's best to either, number one, wipe out some paint where you know your trees are gonna go. That way, when you put in your dark color through it, it doesn't churn with that titanium white. That will give you all kinds of fits. The other thing you can do is like I did over here, where I did not have any titanium white on these mountains because they're in the shadow. Now over here I have some titanium white. I actually, since I'm several videos into this lesson, I actually have let that titanium white dry, so it's going to be a lot easier for me to get this tree over this mountain over here. But I do want to caution you that if you are doing it at home, be very conscious of thick wet paint where you're going to put your trees. Wipe that out with a paper towel if you need to. Trust me, artists all over the world have been wiping paint off their canvas for years in order to make room for new paint to come in there. Watch any plein air painter, they'll wipe off their canvas. I do it all the time as well. It's a very common thing to do. Bob didn't have time to do that kind of work on a 27-minute episode, which is why largely you probably never saw him do that. Okay, so I'm gonna do this again over here. Let's make this guy a little shorter, and I'm just gonna knock him out. All right, let's get him down here just a little bit. All right, and away we go. See how easy that went right over that drier titanium white? Here, let's flesh him out. I don't really like that branch. There we go. Gotta reload. And Bob would oftentimes use the corner of the brush to kind of push up a little bit of scrub grass, little bushy things. You would often do that. Okay. We'll come back a little bit later and get some highlights on these trees, but for now, let's work on a little bit of grass. And for that, we're going to turn to the 1-inch brush, or you can use a 2-inch brush too. It doesn't really matter. You could even use the same old fan brush. So why not? Let's just do that. But whatever works best for you, you can use. The 1-inch brush is kind of going to be a little bit faster. But really, what all I'm going to do is bring in a little bit of mountain mix with a Sap Green mixture, and I'm really, very literally going to scrub this in. You can also tap it in. Sometimes you'll find on the episode, a lot of times on the episode, I should say, you'll find that Bob would tap this color in. You can scrub it in like this. It doesn't matter. Bob's done it many different ways. It all works. Now I'm using that straight mountain mix with a little bit of Sap Green mixed into it. And I'm going to switch to the larger brush, but I'm just going to bring a little bit of land mass over here, and I'm going to switch to this 1-inch brush in just a moment, just to get a little more paint, make this go a little bit faster. All right, so angles are important, so just make sure you know where you want your angles to go, right? So things that are going straight down, apply cliffs. If you have a gentle slope, it'll be sloping land. So I'm gonna squeeze out a little bit more paint and finish this off with a 1-inch brush. So you saw me just very briefly put in just a mountain mixture with a little bit of Sap Green into it as a base coating underneath those trees to kind of connect a little land mass in the foreground. And now let's try to get some green on there. So I'm going to go with cadmium yellow and just a little teeny tiny amount of Sap Green mixture into it. The reason for that is because there's so much blue in that mountain mix that when we add yellow to it, it should turn green. If you're having a little bit of difficulty getting your yellow mixture to stick and turn green to your painting, you could add a little bit of liquid clear, linseed oil, walnut oil. Any of those oils will work to help loosen up your paint. You could also use paint thinner, but I would caution you against paint thinner. Number one, because it's dangerous substance. The fumes are very bad for you, but more importantly, because of the fat over lean method. It's better to put fattier paint. So oil is fat, and so putting fatty paint on top of your other paint is actually going to prevent it from cracking in the future as your paint dries. When you use paint thinner, the paint thins too dry on top of a layer, then the paint below it dries a little bit slower, and because of that, it forms a crust on the top, and then as this one cures, it cracks the paint on the top, and then it falls out. So for archival reasons, if you think your painting is going to be around for a few years, it's always better as a good practice to use the fat over lean method. I'm going to bring down a little bit of I have just a smidgen of this green left. Let me squeeze out just a little bit more, because that's pretty much all I'm going to need, I think. And don't be afraid to experiment with your colors too. If you determine that a color is not working for you when you first apply to it, stop right then. Get it mixed. Get it going. Okay. So I know that this cadmium yellow is very, very thick. So I'm going to apply, just as I recommended to you, I'm going to apply a little bit of, this is straight linseed oil. It's my preferred oil. It's cheap, readily available. Bob used it in his episodes, so there's nothing wrong with that. You'll see in the first several seasons, he would reference using some oil. So now I have a very, very bright green. Now that should dull down as I apply it to the canvas. Now that we've got all this preliminary work done, let's go ahead and get our grasses on there. I'm just going to use this 1-inch brush and kind of tap in. You only have to tap in one side, but you can load both if you want to flip it over. So let's go ahead and do that. And you can even push a little bit into your paint that you've got mixed, and that'll load the paint right at the end of the bristles. Might make it a little bit easier for you. Best way to do this, I think, is to, and this is just me, is to rotate your handle down just a little bit. A lot of times you would see Bob come at it straight down, but he would again come over with an overhead thing, so it was almost as if he was coming down and bending those over. I just like to make it easier on my students and just tell them rotate your handle down just a little bit, because that makes kind of a little straighter edge on the top of your bristles as you're doing it. Makes it a little bit easier for you to lay in this color. So all you have to do literally is tap, 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 And the more you tap, the more it'll blend with that background color. So don't tap too much, because you're also going to be picking up some of that color on your brush. I flipped that over to get a little brighter paint. Load often and wipe out that excess or that paint that you're picking up from the underpainting. Wipe that off. Now, Bob's golden rule is that a thin paint will stick to a thick paint. That's why this yellow-green mixture that I'm putting up here is sticking to that wet underpainting. I'm going to get these little spots here in a minute, so don't fret about that. I'll move the canvas in just a few minutes. Okay. And get those spots. Okay, now that we have two trees in and our foreground grasses, let's turn our attention back just to the highlights of those trees. Now, there's a couple of things you can do. I think I mentioned earlier in the video that you could let those trees dry completely, which is what I would recommend before you put on your highlights. But what I also would recommend, though, even before you let that dry, is to put in a little trunk. So let me just use a little VanDyke brown and dark sienna titanium white mixture just to put in some indications of little trunks that you might be able to see throughout the tree. And that's done with, you can do that very simply with a palette knife if you like. Bob's method was normally to use the palette knife. And I'm just going to take a little bit of color. You don't need a lot. Take a little bit of this white, too, and just kind of mix it so it's a little bit marbled. Maybe I'll throw in a little more dark sienna. Okay, so maybe a little more white. Yeah, there we go. That'll help it. Don't mix it all the way, leave it marbled. And then I'm just gonna use the small edge of the knife, right? This little small edge right there. And I'm just gonna pull a little bit of paint into that knife, not a lot of paint. Here, let me flatten this out a little more, make it a little bit easier to get. A little bit of paint. Put on my old man glasses again. And I can just take this knife and touch and pull just a little bit, just to give an indication of a little trunk that might be visible through there. Don't use a lot of paint and don't put too much tree, because these trees are like very thick, and in fact I might decide that I've got too much on there already and I might cover them up with my highlight color. That is definitely a possibility. Okay, so now that you've got these in, you could let these dry for a couple of days and then you could come back. You could also, many artists will use paper towel method to absorb some of the oil off that paint. So you Kevin Hill fans will know that he often uses a paper towel. So do I, so do many other artists. So if you want to do that, you can lay a paper towel over your trees for 10 or 15 minutes and that'll absorb a lot of the oil out there before you put on your highlights. And that's what I'll do since we're painting wet on wet method. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to dry mine for just a moment and then we'll be back and we'll put on some highlights. Now that my trees are just a little bit drier than they were before because we've soaked out some of that oil using a paper towel, I'm going to go back to a clean fan brush and I'm going to load up some of my my mix. I don't need a ton of it. My thinned down grass color. I'm just going to use the same color just for simplicity's sake. And we're going to load the brush the same way that we did before. The difference here between what we did on the background trees and what we're doing here in the foreground is we don't really need to cover our complete tree with this highlight color. We really just kind of need to go in and we need to leave a lot of this dark because evergreen trees are mostly dark. And so I'm just going to put in a little bit of this color here and there. Using the exact same method, just not as much paint or pressure. Your paint should be thin enough that it's going to come right off of your brush onto your somewhat dry trees. You don't really need to have it be bright at all. Really, the evergreen trees really do remain dark. If you look at some of my studio work, I oftentimes will exaggerate the brightness of the trees just because in the Bob Ross style, I just think that it's kind of fun to play around with colors. So you'll find sometimes that I will put extra bright highlights on evergreen trees that probably really don't exist in nature, but that's just part of me developing my own style and having fun with it. A lot of times people will buy my paintings just for the play and the color. So I like that, and so if you want to make them a little brighter, then you're welcome to do that too. This is your world. You should paint the way that you like. Okay, so that is how we do it, folks. So now we've taught you how to do Bob's most common method for doing evergreen trees. If you stick around, in a week or two, we'll have a new video that'll show you many other ways to do evergreen trees that are not in the Bob Ross style. There are so many ways to do evergreen trees, and they are all correct. So if you're having difficulty with Bob's method, come back and visit me. Make sure you subscribe to that channel, and I'll show you how to do these same trees in other ways. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.